Welcome to the public meeting of Northern Beaches Local Planning Panel. My name is Annalise Tour and I'm the panel chair today. The other panel members are Clara Cranston, Graham Brown as expert members and Peter Compton as the community representative. Before we begin the meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. The panel has adopted public meeting guidelines, which are published on Council's website. The panel has been briefed on each item by the Council staff prior to the meeting and undertaken site inspections either independently or electronically. Today we have a number of people registered to address the panel at the public meeting. The order of speakers for each item will be firstly objectors, followed by those supporting the application, including the applicant or their representative. A registered speaker will have 3 minutes to speak, whereupon a bell will ring and any extension will be granted at my discretion as chair. The panel has been provided with copies of all submissions received in response to the public exhibition of the application and forwarded a copy of all late correspondence. Therefore, there is no need for people to repeat what has been said in these submissions or by what's been said by previous speakers. Speakers should use respectful language. Defamatory or rude language will not be tolerated. And at the end of the oral submissions, panel members may ask questions of a speaker to clarify our understanding of what has been said. Panel meetings are video and audio recorded. The recordings will be published on Council's website after the meeting. Once all speakers in relation to all matters on the agenda have finished, I will close the public meeting and the panel will move into closed session to deliberate and determine all matters on the agenda. The panel determinations and reasons will be published on Council's website, normally within 2 working days. So the first item is in relation to conflict of interest. The panel is bound by a code of conduct for local planning panel members approved by the Minister for Planning. As required by the code, panel members must sign a declaration disclosing whether they have a conflict in interest in relation to any matter on the agenda for the public meeting. After the meeting, the declarations will be published on Council's website. I have declared a conflict of interest in relation to item 4.1, the DA for 1102 Barrenjoey Road, Palm Beach. I will not be involved in the deliberation or determination, and Graham Brown will chair the meeting for this item. No other panel members have declared a conflict of interest in relation to any item on today's agenda. Item 2, the minutes of the previous meeting. The panel notes that the previous meeting of the panel held on the 1st of February were adopted by the chair of that meeting and have been posted on Council's website. And item 3, no category 3 items are on today's agenda. So in relation to item 4, as I've stated, I have a conflict of interest in item 4.1, so I will leave the meeting in Graham's capable hands. Thank you.
Thank you. The first person I have on the list to speak is Prue Rydstrand. Are you there, Prue?
Hi, Graham, I am.
Yes, can you proceed, please?
Yes, certainly. First of all, thank you very much for your time today. I guess up front, we just wanted to say that we're certainly not anti-development. We believe that the proposed development was probably more reasonably sized and attempted to fit in the controls, that it would be much more sensitive to the surroundings and we probably wouldn't be here. But we feel the area deserves a more appropriately sized building, and one that can be built certainly exists on this piece of land. So since we sort of started this process, our main concerns have been pretty straightforward. We think the DA is too big, high, bulky, and we think that's because of the height breaches of the controls of about 35%, and then the front setback control of about 45%. You'll see through the submissions, and I'll try to be brief, our planner and lawyer said that the height variation 4.6 request is unfounded due to lack of environmental planning grounds. And throughout, she said that the assessing officer has erroneously engaged in comparison by accepting the proposed development will result in a better environmental planning outcome versus the approved DA, which is apparently not the test. And so we don't think this DA seems to be assessed on its merits. The other thing that we asked and highlight is the panel to consider the recent case just 2 weeks ago at 1105 Barrenjoey Road. That was an example of a similar proposed development of 3 stories that was dismissed in the Land and Environment Court. And here the proposed height breach was just 28.3%, and it also had a limited setback as this is. That site sits aside a 3-story building and one across the road and has a smaller height breach, and we sort of read that the scale of the height contravention was in excess of those buildings that were referenced, and it said that there was an inappropriate and jarring height massing in the streetscape. And so we kind of think, well, we've got a 3-story development next to 2-story buildings, so how could that not be considered jarring too? So ultimately what we believe is the height and setback requirement should be enforced. It's a very sensitive area next to a heritage item, and we also note that the Palm Beach locality statement says 2 stories below the tree canopy is advisable. And then I guess from our perspective, we just wanted to make it clear to you that versus the original DA and a compliant one, this proposal definitely hems us in a lot more. We get less solar access, less privacy, and certainly a lot more geotechnical concerns here. So just briefly on the geotech, because we've got our specialist there, we've repeatedly requested more geotechnical information from the start to assess the implications of the excavation, and we've provided expert geotechnical advice to substantiate those concerns. But we feel that the requests have been largely ignored by both the developer and council, and the provision of high-level stock standard information has kind of been drip-fed, but I'll leave that to Warwick. So I guess ultimately what we're saying here is we would have liked to have seen stricter adherence to controls and also a consideration and assessment on its merits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Panel members, any questions? Okay, thank you. The next person I have on the list is Nicholas Sproats. Nicholas.
No, that's fine. He's with myself. It's Nick and I. We're the southern boundary neighbours.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
The next person is Warwick Davies, your geotech engineer. Drew. Is he not here?
I'm here and ready to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Davies, thank you. Can you proceed?
Yes, with pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity. I have submitted on behalf of the next door neighbour, my client, Prue and Nicholas, a substantial geotechnical review of the issues as I see them in my report under the heading of EI Australia, which I'm now principal engineer. Previously, I have submitted numerous reports in relation to the general development in the area under my previous banner of Davies Geotechnical Proprietary Limited. Now, the seamless transition to my current position has to be acknowledged, and anything that I've said in the past is clearly currently active and very much part of the new scenario that I occupy. I believe that, in summary, purposefully put 4 significant dot points on the very first page of my current review, which is dated the 13th of February this year. And getting straight to the point, I believe that from everything I've studied since about 2021, when I first was introduced to the proposed development as in its form at that time, I've had reservations about the potential impacts of that work upon the adjoining land to the south, that is the Rhinestone property, and with particular concern not only about the usual things of excavation support and interference with the land and with groundwater and so on. There is a particular element of risk of concern both from the geotechnical and the environmental point of view in relation to a very significant stack of very large sandstone boulders which are situated on the adjoining land, 1100 Barrenjoey Road, and protrude across the boundary onto the subject property at 1102. And they have to be disturbed significantly by the proposed excavation for the basement and the driveway access to it that is part of the current development design before council. And in my review of the available information, I've not found adequate advice through the architectural drawings or any engineering details to indicate just what the excavation really entails in its geometry and size, scope and bulk, other than a level at which the basement will be constructed at. Importantly, the important support that the applicant has for his project is through the reporting of the JK group, and I've been provided with and have reviewed those reports, and they're all commented on in my most recent review. I won't go into that in serious detail. The report does say it all. But I do believe overall that the JK reporting does not adequately come up to scratch in a manner sufficient for the council to be able to say that those reports are relied on for the approval that's now before the panel. And I think there are quite a number of issues which, although serious updates have been presented, don't hit the mark in my view. And overall, I see that the approval is just not justified on the basis of the current information. That concerns me from the point of view of what happens after an approval is given and the project proceeds to construction, and the lack of any control over the progression to solve some of the problems which are very important that are highlighted in my review, I don't think exists if a simple DA is prepared. I really believe that information should be on the table for the council to consider and take into account as part of its approval, ultimately, if that approval is given, and not left to the vagaries of some engineering design down the track and some inadequate controls through the private certification process for a construction certificate. I believe there are issues that have to be solved now as part of the approval before the project should be allowed to proceed down the track to a construction certificate. Very importantly, I see the risk issues that are concentrated on in the early JK reports, and which I have covered in my review report recently, are not properly answered at all. JK present a risk outcome for the boulders that are in question here as part of their original reporting. I think it was back in the year 2020. And they are made on the basis of assumptions about information that's quite important to their knowledge of the likelihood of failure of the boulders if they're to be disturbed, and failure meaning displacement, dislodgement or collapse, and the consequences of that. Their risk assessment then comes up with a very low outcome, which is based on the need for further information. That further information has not properly been obtained up to this point of time. And as I'm suggesting in my report, that risk assessment needs to be readdressed, and the acceptance of it by council, I believe, is flawed. At this stage, I really have serious concerns that the risk issues have been properly dealt with, and I think they should be prior to an approval being made. Overall, I would leave the reading of the report and my conclusions to the panel, but I do seriously present these views as a professional engineer of long standing from an engineering perspective. I am guessing at the planning and perhaps legal implications in all of this process. I'm not qualified to comment on those, but my experience does tell me that the process of casually providing an assessment approval and then leaving it up to others to get it right is very, very dangerous. And in this case, I would not like to see it proceed on that basis. So that's my conclusion. I would suggest from an engineering perspective that the council does need to reassess this in greater detail before an approval could be provided and then approved under the usual planning process. That's about all I need to say at the moment, and I thank you for the time and hearing me out. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Davies, is it a question that it's not that it can't be done, that you just don't have enough information at this stage to say it can be done properly? Is that your position in a nutshell? That
is a reasonable layman's summary of it. I put it in specific terms that there is much to be done to get an engineering concept even, let alone the design around it, that would fit a proper acceptance that the risk issues are addressed, and those risks are pertinent either during the construction and even after construction. I think it is the during construction aspect that is most uncertain and needs to be bolstered before an approval is given by a much more rigorous and robust design for the excavation support and the methodology of removing part of the protruding boulders in order to create the space for the driveway and the basement. None of that information is available in the current details that I've been able to review, and they're the same details that the panel has before it and the council as well. That's where I see it. Yes, in the end, I agree. All things are pretty possible, but you've got to have a good design, you've got to have a budget for it, and you've got to have the right controls over the construction and acceptance of it in the end on completion to be certain that you have done the right thing all the way through.
Now, you've seen the conditions of consent which the council have suggested?
Yes, I have. And
they don't give you any comfort?
I have made comments on the conditions of consent in the report that I'm referring to, my review report of 13 February this year. Those conditions, I think, are quite casual in my view. I don't think the council's consideration of the issues and their lack of knowledge could lead to an approval on some of those matters, and I've detailed that in my report.
Okay, thank you. Panel members, any questions of Mr. Davies?
Yeah, I do.
Yes,
Graham and I were on the panel for, I think it was 1110 Barrenjoey Road, where I believe, Mr. Davies, were you at the time representing the rice stands as well?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So I recall at the time when that matter was considered between yourself and Mr. Crozier, that the panel ended up including deferred commencement conditions, which were based on advice that came forward by yourself and I think Mr. Crozier at the time, and that related to, I've just pulled it up, a stage 1 geotechnical investigation comprising boreholes and further investigations, some other detailed subsurface conditions, and a CMP, a construction methodology statement incorporating an excavation management plan, and it goes and lists a number of different points. Also an independent review being carried out by a suitably qualified experienced geotechnical engineer. Are those types of conditions that I believe were drafted at the time largely in response to the material that was put forward in relation to that was dealing with the same set of boulders, which is why it's probably relevant to my question here. Is that the kind of information that would need to be included in a condition should this be approved for other reasons? Is that the type of thing that's lacking, or is it a different situation that we're dealing with this application compared to how it related to the same boulders with the other application?
Happy to answer that. There are two issues to focus on, and there is no relevance of the boulders, quote unquote, that you've mentioned as being the same as the issues that I addressed and was concerned about for the matter relating to the DA for 1110, and the deferred commencement condition that was finally determined and the approval was based on that was the outcome as I understand it. So I believe that in my engineering judgment, the deferred commencement condition does give the breathing space, if you like, or the extra ability of the council to have information put before it, which it then can be satisfied, subject to an independent review, by the way, that would then be suitable for the application to go ahead on a deferred commencement basis. Now, in terms of the boulders, you mentioned that these are the same boulders as currently are being addressed in the case of 1102 for this particular meeting. Now, that's not the case at all. The boulders that are subject of my review immediately now and which we're talking about are separate to and were not at all influenced by the proposed development of 1110 Barrenjoey Road. The boulders that were involved in that were the ones much further uphill and scattered all over the hillside within the site involving the proposed development for 1110. And I think that distinction needs to be made. I just, with courtesy, apologise, but I am correcting you on that.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
In my opinion, I've said it in my review report, the appropriate passageway for this current situation to progress at the moment would be, if an approval was to be given right here and now, I would insist from my point of view that it be protected as a deferred commencement condition.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, any further questions?
No.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Davies. The next person I have is Oriana Garcia.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Okay, can you proceed? Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the panel, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Oriana Garcia from Georgia Lina Architects, and I'm addressing the panel on behalf of the owners of 1110 Barrenjoey Road. We stand by the many points raised in previous submissions, but there are two main concerns we would like to highlight for the panel's consideration. Firstly, while the council might be satisfied that the geotechnical risk associated with the proposed development have been addressed, we strongly believe the methodology for the necessary bulk excavation and proposed retaining wall along the eastern boundary have not been addressed properly. In reports submitted by JK Geotechnics, there is barely any mention on the rear retaining wall, even though stability hazards have been identified. We cannot understand how they propose to achieve a 30-metre excavation without drilling or putting permanent anchors into 1110. And the biggest concern is that the construction of 1110 is due to commence within a couple of months, meaning that the approved bungalow, which is only 1 metre away from the common boundary, will most definitely be underway before works commence on number 1102. Council's opinion that they're satisfied to issue approval without this methodology being articulated or understood is, in our opinion, unsafe and unacceptable. Troy Crozier from Crozier Geotechnical Consultants will expand on this issue shortly. Secondly, there is an issue with the building height, which the proposal exceeds by 3 metres, a clear breach of the LEP. Additionally, and as a result of the excessive height, the proposal is not consistent with a number of LEP objectives, adversely impacting the and dwarfing Barrenjoey House, the neighbouring sites, and overall character of the locality. There also seems to be conflicting heritage reports for building designs of similar height and scale, and while the front facade is more articulated in its form from previous designs, the bulk of the roof remains a large dominant feature that is almost double the size and height of the Barrenjoey House roof. In summary, the proposal as it stands would have a detrimental effect on the area, with the bulk and the height of the building damaging the ambience of the famous streetscape. In addition, the excavation required is unsafe, and this proposal cannot be considered without the methodology being clearly articulated. We're surprised by council not supporting the proposal despite the numerous objections and the many contraventions to the planning guidelines. Accordingly, we respectfully request the panel to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Panel members, any questions?
No.
No.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. The last person I have for those people who have put submissions in on the application is Tony Crozier. Tony, are you there?
Yes, certainly am. It's actually Troy.
I'm sorry. Oh, it is Troy too. It's
Yep.
my dyslexia playing up. Sorry. Can you go ahead, please, Tony?
It's very common. So I'm principal engineer for Crozier Geotechnical Consultants, obviously representing the owners of number 1110 Barrenjoey Road. So I've reviewed what has been submitted in the geotechnical reports by JK, principally the report from the 16th of September 2022, which includes the forms 1 and 1A, which appears to be the report that is used to, or will be used to assess the geotechnical issues related to this development. Page 1 of that report references only one architectural drawing and none of the others within the plans and the master set which have been submitted. This report on page 1 goes on to discuss that the new building and garage will be cut into the existing slope, extending a distance of about 3 metres from the face of the soldier pile wall, with assumed bulk excavation level of -1 RL, thus requiring cuts to 11 metres depth. However, the design plans submitted in the master set show a terrace formed at the rear of the proposed retaining wall. It extends from the crest of that wall to the rear upslope boundary, is common with number 1110 Barrenjoey Road, with what appears to be, I assume, a retaining wall formed on the boundary drawn in a grey line. Now, the ground surface levels at this boundary have been surveyed in works at 1110 at RL 12. So this rear boundary retaining wall is in fact about 5.5 metres in height, as measured from the crest of the lower wall. Total bulk excavation to 13 metres. This second terrace excavation and obviously subsequent deeper bulk excavation up to the rear boundary doesn't appear to be mentioned in any of the submitted geotechnical reports. It's not discussed, mentioned in any way. So I have concerns it's not properly been assessed by them. Whether they've been aware of that or not, I'm not sure. In the drawings they've reviewed. Now, what they do discuss in their report is that there's a steep slope rising 45 degrees, which is very steep, up from the existing soldier pile wall in number 1102, which is apparently stabilised geogrids and drainage systems. And they identified instability within this zone as one of the potential hazards in their report. However, the report also dictates that further investigation, design and certification of this existing slope is required unless on-site investigation is completed. There's no indication that any of that subsequent assessment has been done. So this hazard remains as it is. There's no indication that any geotechnical conditions have been confirmed in the rear portion of the site, outside of the existing soldier pile wall, where it's indicated that there's some low to medium strength siltstone at the base of the wall exposed. So without having confirmed any of these conditions, I question how it is possible that the proposed development has been properly assessed for geotechnical risks when we don't seem to have this rear 5.5 metre deep excavation included in any of their assessments. How on earth this zone will be stabilised as part of the works? The 45 degree slope, which is considered to be a landslip hazard at present, is not going to support any sort of excavation machinery, piling, anything like that. So I just don't feel that there's enough coverage on that side of it to really make a proper assessment of the geotechnical risks and obviously methods that they can be used to resolve that problem. There are parts in the report which discuss temporary anchors, which I'm assuming are going to be used for the lower soldier pile wall, with the option to brace that wall off the completed development. However, the rear boundary wall is located well away from the proposed development, so it effectively removes the potential to brace from the existing development. So that would indicate that they're proposing potentially use permanent anchors under 1110 Barrenjoey Road, which I don't think is a suitable option. And I know that my client certainly does not accept that as an option, because it will effectively require an easement formed across his property. There's some issues in regards to how the ground surface is supported at the southeast corner. The architectural drawings just seem to show a garden and a fence in that location and no retention system, yet it is apparent that there's a 5.5 metre deep excavation in that location upslope from the boulders which impact the neighbouring property to the south. So current situation is that I don't think enough of that portion of the site has been assessed for risks, potential design options. It's very much left open, and I don't think that meets the policy requirements of the council's geotechnical risk management policy. It appears to have been unassessed as part of the works. So that's my main concern, along with some of the concerns which were brought up with Warwick regarding confirmation that this work can be done, designs, etc., rather than it just being left to however it's dealt with in the future.
Okay.
That's all I have to say.
Yes, thanks, Troy. Panel members, any questions of Mr. Crozier?
So just to summarise, Peter Cotton here, just to summarise, it's just a matter of the detail about those things you raised being provided and assessed properly prior to a approval being given. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, yes, that's correct. I don't feel that they've been. It doesn't appear to have been addressed at all by JK. This rear excavation, which is 5.5 metres deep, it's a large hole.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Crozier. For the applicant, we have Mr. Boston.
Sorry, Graham,
I'm sorry.
before we move to that, can we just check? I know Nicholas was separately listed as a registered speaker. I just wanted to check he didn't want to raise any new issues that his wife hadn't covered, just to make sure for procedural fairness that.
Thank you, Cara. Yeah, look, I might just jump in. I think the main concerns and have been very much raised in various submissions are the fact that the front setback is 45% non-compliant. I don't know why that can't be compliant. If everyone's looking at this versus an old approval, which again I don't think is the test, we're meant to be looking forwards, not backwards. This new proposal goes back another 4 metres back into the site as opposed to the previous approval. So if you're going back 4 metres, why can't you go back further on the front, which would obviously go towards being within controls. And in terms of height, I mean, I've lived in Palm Beach for 37 years. If I look at the Blueberry Ash site on Ocean Road, that was a 2-year planning process that the Rothwells went through, the old Beachcomber site that people remember on Ocean Road. And I think the community got a great outcome there in terms of it being terraced back and very much fitting within the slope of the land in terms of the heights. So I don't see why the top floor here can't be terraced back, just like it was at the Blueberry Ash development on Ocean Road. So I think they're the main concerns, is that the fact that it's 35% non-compliant on height and it's 45% non-compliant on front setback. And as everyone's talked about, I don't think that because this is better than the last one, that should be the basis of approval. We need to look forward, not looking back. But again, if you're going to allow another 4 metres back into the site and increasing the GFA by 30-something%, why can't there be certain give in terms of meeting the controls on height and setback? So those are the issues that I wish to put forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sproats. Any questions from the panel on Mr. Sproats?
No.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Boston, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a consultant planner, so I'll be speaking to any planning questions that the panel might have. I've also got Rob Mills, the architect here, Levy Carter, the landscape architect, James Phillips from Weir Phillips Heritage, and also Woody Thiessen from JK Geotechnics. There's been a lot of discussion thus far in relation to the geotechnical issues, so I don't know whether that's something that we might address first, and then I might just double back in relation to the broader planning considerations, if that...
I think that would work well, thank you.
Look, in relation, before I hand it over to Woody, there's been concerns expressed in relation to the lack of geotechnical reporting, particularly in relation to the boulders in that southeastern corner of the property. And what I draw the panel's attention to, although Mr. Crozier didn't seem to have access to the additional reporting, is that there was an original report submitted on the 25th of May 2023. That was augmented by a supplementary report on the 15th of August, which most certainly referenced the amended plans in detail. There was then concerns raised late in the piece from the neighbours' geotechnical engineer. Those concerns were articulated to us by council, and there were 2 supplementary reports submitted since that date. And there was one on the 31st of January 2023, which went specifically into how the rocks would be excavated and supported. and then a further report on the 8th of February, which is certainly in the council system and referenced in the supplementary memo, which goes towards some additional testing in terms of drilling into the existing shotcrete wall to work out thicknesses and what's actually lying behind it. So contrary to what you've heard, there's actually been significant detailed assessment in relation to the boulders in that southeastern corner of the property, and we certainly believe that council's engineers have reviewed all this documentation. They are satisfied that not only do we comply with council's geotechnical risk management policy, but we satisfy the geotechnical risk considerations in the LEP, and they're at clause 7.7, in that the applicant has demonstrated that the risk and impact can be reasonably avoided through management of the risk and the impact. And there's conditions in the consent that tie ongoing design and construction to the details within those various geotechnical assessments. But I'll hand it over to Woody to respond maybe in more detail.
Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Woody. I'm from JK Geotechnics. I think, as you have heard from both Warwick and Troy, there's obviously concerns regarding support of the southern and the eastern site boundaries. So I think if I just address Warwick's comments first with regards to the southern boundary, as Greg has just highlighted, one of Warwick's main concerns was that there was not sufficient information on the materials present below the upper boulder, and those materials will be supported. So additional work has been done in the sense that a number of holes have been drilled through the shotcrete panel to actually determine the materials behind that shotcrete panel, and that's been included in the sections we've provided and the subsequent supplementary report, the letter report. In terms of risk and the discussion around risk, I think what needs to be recognised is that the construction of these new retaining walls for the site will be engineered and they'll be constructed. And as a consequence, once constructed, the risk associated with the boulders, for instance, which will require cutting back of that portion of the boulder or the boulders that extend into the proposed excavation. Once constructed, the risk posed by the soils and rock present behind and below the boulders will actually be mitigated, and it will be supported in the long term. The other issue that Warwick raised was that there was no methodology as to how these boulders would be supported in the long term, or both in the short term and the long term. And we have provided a report providing a methodology of how those works would be completed. And in that regard, there would be a ramp essentially that would be constructed to allow piling rig to access the top of the boulder. The boulder at the upper boulder would then be cut back, and then a soldier pile will be installed through the soils and rock down to below bulk excavation level, and then that would either be anchored or internally braced in the short term, and in the long term, the support of that wall would be provided by the structure itself. Now, whether or not anchors will be allowed or permission will be given for anchors is another thing, but if anchors can't be installed, it can be internally braced and supported temporarily in that case, with the long-term support coming from the structure itself. So in terms of the risk assessments we've provided, I think we've got to just draw a distinction between the existing site, or the site as it is, and the developed site. And in our report, we actually consider both cases. So when we talk about the risk posed by the boulders in their current state, which is most of the. So there were 5 risks we identified. One of which was the steep slope at the back of the property that Troy discussed. Those risks are all existing risks. When we actually construct, or when this site is developed, those risks will all be removed. So the risk that is posed by the uncertainty that Warwick talks about in terms of we don't have as constructed details on the shotcrete that's below the boulders, that will all be removed. So that risk itself will be removed. The only risk we will have will be the risk of the constructed retaining walls. So in terms of the rear retaining wall that Troy was talking about, that wall will either need to be propped or cantilevered, but that will be a wall that will be designed by the structural engineers, and it will be as Troy indicated, it will be a tiered wall, and it can be designed based upon the parameters we've provided in our report itself. And I think, look, if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Yes, panel members, any questions?
Just Peter Cotton here. Just from what I hear, you're saying the designs for the retaining wall and the rock support can be done without the need for permanent anchors?
Yes, so they will need to be
temporary anchors, but not permanent.
Well, I mean, you can do it without temporary anchors as well.
Okay.
If permission's not given by the neighbours, the support will need to be provided internally. So you'll need internal propping, and that will need to be temporary until support can be provided by the structure itself once it's built.
Okay, that's it for me.
Okay. Now Woody, you've read the conditions of approval.
Look, I haven't read them in detail, no.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. Cara, is there any questions you want to ask?
No, not in relation to that, thanks.
Okay, I'd like to hear from Mr. Phillips about the planning and the comments that have been raised by people you've heard this morning about the height and bulk and the impact on the heritage item next door. So,
can you see me and hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you. Yes.
Excellent. And I've got my camera on. We work very closely with Council's heritage consultant with regard to height and bulk. And the building's been very carefully articulated to ensure that the components of the building reflect Barrenjoey House in a satisfactory manner. So that work was done over some period of time with Bob Moore, who's a very senior heritage consultant, and in consultation with the architect and myself, came to a conclusion that kept the bulk and scale, given the size of the lot of the building, to a size that doesn't overwhelm Barrenjoey House. It leaves Barrenjoey House with the building with a reasonable degree of separation, and particularly the front elevation has been broken into a series of components that reflect the size of Barrenjoey House. It's a bigger building next to a smaller building. There's no way around that, but certainly the way the building presents now is a series of pavilions, a series of verandas, and in such a manner as to be respectful to Barrenjoey House.
What about the bulk of the roof? It's obviously taller than Barrenjoey House.
Correct.
There's a fair bit of bulk in the roof because of the design of the upper level. What's your thoughts on that bulk and that impact on Barrenjoey House?
Well, my thoughts are that in terms of looking at it from either way along the streetscape, that bulk isn't desperately apparent. And the bulk only becomes apparent of the roof when you're well across the road and looking back towards the building. I think the roof sets back, and I think that bulk is quite acceptable in terms of its amount and the height that it projects.
Okay, panel members, some questions of Mr. Phillips?
Probably. I guess I had a similar question in terms of the bulk of the roof and that kind of mansard style, and I said that's sort of adding to it. Is that, from a heritage perspective, is that style of roof preferable to if a flat roof design or something that was set back from the facade where it read as, 2 stories at the front and then a third story beyond? So I'm just trying to understand from a heritage perspective why this style of roof is preferable to, something that would be a third story setback, etc., or something.
Sure. What tends to happen is it's the amount of height breach becomes quite important, as you would understand in the assessment process. By putting a pitched roof on the building, you lower the actual the height of the elevation or the street frontage, and by putting a roof on, a building of that size would have a roof with a reasonable pitch in terms of its heritage context with Barrenjoey House, and in so doing, that roof gives sufficient elevation to put a story within it. So a mansard roof gives a roof form to the top of the building, which gives it a cap, whereas what tends to happen to stay within the height limit, if you start recessing and putting a story well recessed, you don't breach the height limit, but you end up with a large flat roof building or with a series of flat roofs. So I think this is a good outcome in terms of matching Barrenjoey House without copying it. It sits contextually in that section of streetscape, which is an unusual streetscape with literally a cliff behind it and water frontage on the other side of the street. So within that context, I think it works quite well.
I've also got a question relating to the facade, and I guess it's just one in particular. I guess when you look at the elevation plan and the CGIs.
Sure.
And I do understand, I'm not a heritage expert, but I do understand about, compatibility and not copying and all those types of things. So it's not, my question's not in that context, but I'm just wanting some feedback on the different proportions in terms of, I guess, the window height, extent of glazing, and while I think the line of the eaves is consistent, the 2 stories read against both at slightly different levels. And so I was reading some bulk in relation to that. So I'm just wanting to understand a little bit more about, I guess, the response that's being put forward in relation to that difference and the acceptability of that, and I guess how that reads with the balustrade, the columned balustrade or post balustrade as well.
Are you talking about those horizontal lines in relation to Barrenjoey House? Or?
Yes, yeah. I am. So
yeah.
I guess, and I know it's a heritage building, so it has different floor to ceiling heights and all of that. And so it's really about when you read the first 2 floors, about where the fenestration is. Obviously, there's a bit of a difference, but there's a larger extent of glazing, and the glazing on the proposal extends higher to a ceiling point.
Yes.
So it's really about the read, I guess, the horizontal read of the 2 levels, the compatibility of those.
In terms of the horizontal read, what I normally suggest to be careful of in putting a building beside a heritage building is you have to be careful not to read horizontal lines of the heritage building directly onto the new building, because in a normal streetscape circumstance, and even in historic streetscapes, no attention was ever given to buildings beside each other maintaining similar cornice lines or eave lines or whatever. So they generally vary somewhat. It's more that the overall proportions of the building become a series of components that read with similar proportions to the heritage items. So that becomes the more important element than whether a balustrade line reads with a windowsill line of the building adjacent. The other thing is that Barrenjoey House is a very simple building, and it has a quiet dignity of its own based on the fact that it's relatively simple. The awnings on the front tend to take away from that a little bit, but underneath it is quite a simple building. The proposal has quite a bit more detail on the basis that that helps to break up the proportions, but also it reads as quite a different building to the heritage item, but at the same time maintaining those characteristics of broken proportions and so forth to give it some good harmony with the heritage item.
And Graham, I had one final question.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
This just relates to, and I know you're representing the applicant, and this comment comes from the assessment report from Council's Heritage Officer, but it does mention in the report the suggestions being made to a revision in the materials and finishes schedule that will hopefully achieve a better contextual relationship, and it goes through a few different things in terms of roof form and colours and that type of thing. The condition that is proposed in relation to that doesn't actually include much of that detail. It just basically requires a full detail of external finishes, colours and materials to be submitted to Council's Heritage Advisor for approval. I think it's prior to CC. Or no, it's actually, yes, to the certifying authority. I just wondered, have you given any consideration? I mean, I'm not sure if you've read the condition or if you've read it in the context of the assessment that's in the report, but given any consideration to those suggestions that have been made by Council's Heritage Officer, or have any further clarity on how the design might be adjusted with regard to materiality?
Look, in those in that context, Bob Moore and I had quite considerable discussion, and we've worked on quite a number of other projects over a period of time, and I feel confident that Mr. Moore represents council and hopefully the citizens in the area's interest in terms of finding a colour and material palette that will be satisfactory. And I think on behalf of the applicant, we'll work in a very cooperative way with Mr. Moore on that basis. So I think the condition, it does give considerable discretion to Mr. Moore, and Mr. Moore's extremely capable, and will exercise that discretion extremely well, I believe.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, just one question. Just looking at the photo montage that was in the submission, the proposal in its own right is quite much larger than Barrenjoey House, and what's dominant in my view in the streetscape is the balconies aligned perfectly along three pods of balconies. I'm just wondering whether that should be a bit more articulated to try and break the bulk of the building down in the street by perhaps recessing the centre one back, just to create some difference in the line. I just want your opinion on that.
Look, I think there are a lot of valid suggestions in a scheme like this that can be put forward. Recessing the balconies or bringing the balconies forward, I'm not sure without, again, the rigour of doing further sketching. My background's architecture. You need to do these things with quite a deal of detail and care. I think at the moment the resolution is quite good. I recognise what you're saying about the size of the building. Then becomes the dilemma of breaking it into a set of components, but then if you start to break it into too many components, it starts to become bitty and it loses its own sense of repose and architectural integrity. So it becomes a complex set of iterations. And I think, again, Bob Moore, the heritage consultant for council, worked very hard at getting what he thought was a good resolution of the front elevation, and particularly its relationship to Barrenjoey House, and also importantly to the overall streetscape along that part of Barrenjoey Road.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
No more questions, panel members. Any other members from the applicant's team you wish to speak to?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't mind just responding just before Rob Mills does to a few of those issues. Look, I think it's important for the panel to understand where this journey started, and it started with my client purchasing the property in 2020, mid-2020. Mid-2021, we lodged an application to modify that previous 2014 consent, primarily to address building commissioner class 2 type issues, and also to put a better architectural spin on the scheme. Once that application was lodged, we got very clear feedback from council staff, from council's design and sustainability panel, and from the community in terms of the submissions received, that what they actually wanted to see in terms of council's desired future character statement, which talks about this seaside village character, is not a flat roof development as originally approved, but one that contained a pitched roof. So a lot of the concern raised in relation to the additional bulk that the pitched roof form adds is in direct response to this DFC issue and council wanting us to come back with a pitched roof form. So the application was then effectively withdrawn, the modification, and we lodged a new DA, which relies primarily on council accepting that a pitched roof form was going to have some additional height than a flat roof form, and that it provided better outcomes to and from the development for a number of reasons. And as you're aware, one of the conditions actually requires that previous consent to be surrendered. In regards to the articulation on the facade, I was just having a look through the architectural plans, and I'm not sure if I can share it, but I'd simply ask the panel to look at the floor plans, particularly in relation to the balconies, that they have deliberately been broken up with two recessed elements along the building facade. That was done in consultation with Bob Moore. The application's also been to the Design and Sustainability Panel 3 times now, and one of their fundamental issues that they wanted to see was the building peeled back from Barrenjoey House in that north western corner to provide a public open space area, which also exposed that southern facade of Barrenjoey House. And when you have a look again at the architectural floor plans, you'll see that contrary to how the montage might suggest, the building is set back further beyond the street alignment of Barrenjoey House, so that you are reading Barrenjoey House in certainly not just a front facade, but in side elevation as you head north along Barrenjoey Road. Similarly, the design's been pulled away from the southwestern corner where it adjoins the residential property to the south, to not only maintain some view corridors, reduce solar access, but also reduce the bulk of the building as it presents in the streetscape. So the roof element wasn't part of our original vision. It was to go with a 3-storey flat roof option as part of a modification. And the process that we have gone through with council and council's design and sustainability panel, council's heritage expert, has been in good faith, and on the basis that before we lodged that application, we were advised that council would like to see a pitched roof form to ensure consistency with the DFC. Just finally, I might get another opportunity. In relation to geotech, we note that we do not rely on rock anchors. We can carry out all the works wholly within our subject property. In relation to 1110 and the concerns expressed by the panel previously in terms of their deferred commencement condition, we certainly different to that particular application, where the additional information that council was requesting, or the panel was requesting, has been provided up front. It's in the reports that have been submitted to council. The conditions capture all the reporting in those documents, and to that extent we say that a deferred commencement condition isn't necessary under the circumstances. Rob, hand it over to you.
So can I actually ask questions of Greg first?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes.
Sorry, Greg. You took us through a little bit of the background there, and I know the report makes a lot of comparison to this being a better outcome than the previous approval. We're obviously assessing this application on the basis of what's before us. We haven't been provided with a copy of the previous approval, so we don't have the plans to know what it looks like. But it sounds like it was flat roof development, 3 stories presumably, because in one of the conditions it talks about this proposal being a little bit higher than what the previous approval was. But I'm just keen to understand then, because we don't have the plans, if it was a 3-story flat roof design, was that top floor, was that set back from the 2 stories below? And if so, is it the same setback for the top level of this current proposal compared to what was previously approved?
Sure. Look, I'm surprised the panel doesn't have a copy of the previous consent, because it's on council's system. But page 61 of the agenda, I'm not sure whether you can pull that up and I can speak to that.
Greg, we can share screen and show the plans.
Would the panel like to see the plans in their totality?
And I would like to speak to them when I have the opportunity to speak, so maybe it's a good time to share the plans.
Well, I would like to understand this setback. Like, is it coming forward?
Yeah, sure. So, Cara,
is it consistent?
Yeah, if you look at the, oh, here they are. So these are the stamped plans. So you'll see there that what was approved was a 3-story shop top housing development with a flat roof. And if you can turn to the section as part of that.
Greg, this
no,
red dotted line is the approved, the flat roof one.
Right. Can you just go to the approved section?
Sure. This is
I think
approved set of drawings.
Greg, could I? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this is the approved section. You can see there the 3 stories. Cara, to answer your question, what was approved was effectively, to the boundary. The upper level was set back, and you can see that where it says delete screen, you can start sort of reading that, well, if you were to put that upper level within a pitched roof form, that it's going to push back in any event consistent with what is currently now proposed. So what we've managed to do is, rather than relying on this scheme, we've come up with our own scheme that incorporates an upper level in a pitched roof form, but also gone further in terms of addressing the heritage issues in terms of how the building relates to Barrenjoey House. And when you have a look at the previously approved relationship compared to what is now proposed in terms of that public forecourt area, it's a substantial improvement. But Rob?
Thank you, panel. Thank you, our consultant team, the consultants representing our adjoining neighbours, the council. My responsibility in representing my client is to curate, to listen, and to design in response to the information we gather along the journey. And that's exactly what's happened with this application. Our client has given us the resources to assemble an expert team from across Australia to advise us, to answer council's questions, neighbours' consultants' questions, the panel today. This has been a very collaborative process over a 2.5-year period with complete commitment by our client to invest the time and the energy into listening and then addressing and informing all of the stakeholders. I think a summary statement is that the leaders of the Palm Beach community went to the council in response to this scheme. Ada, if you could go back to the front elevation, and said, we do not want this building built. Our client is in the awkward position of purchasing a site with a DA, and if he can't attain a new DA, is forced into building this. And the leaders of the Palm Beach community made it very clear that they didn't want this built. Our client doesn't want to build, the council doesn't want to build. I don't think anyone wants this building built. And so we've worked for 2 years to listen, to include the opinions of all of the expert advisors, the council, and listen to the adjoining neighbours concerned and increase setbacks and so on. And even as late as last week, we were doing further testing over the last 3 weeks and submitting updated geo reports to respond to the legitimate questions of our adjoining neighbours advisors. And what's come out of that is their principal concern that there would be anchors required to support the construction of our building was proved to be that we don't need anchors. So here we are today, and we're all charged with the responsibility of making something special on this land. It's significant land. It's next door to a significant building in a very important part of Australia. And I can stand by my client and my consultant team and say we have done our absolute best, and we have genuinely listened. And I think the design does embody the advice of council's heritage advisor, Bob Moore, who we know is a very strict, strongly viewed man who stands by his principles, and we won Bob's support for this. And so I believe that this building, as I obviously would, I'm the architect for it, believe it should be approved. Ada, if you could go to what we're proposing compared with what's approved. We'll skip over the sort of keep going at it. Yeah.
This is approved in blue dotted line, and
Yes.
this is our proposed elevation.
In the background.
In the background, yeah. And this is the photo montage, and you can see the relationship with the Barrenjoey house with the pitch roof, which is much better than the previous approved.
So,
And Rob,
Cara, in relation to your questions, which I thought were very good, we have lined up the eve of our building with the eve of Barrenjoey House. It's one of those foundation conservation architect details. We've done that. We have introduced an articulated form. We've divided the building into 3 components with indents between them. All of these design ideas are born to reduce the bulk and the scale of the building. We've set the building back repeatedly from the adjoining boundary and to distance the proposed building from Barrenjoey House. This is following the advice of Bob Moore and our conservation architect. And then most importantly, we've created a public forecourt, which is the public space. It becomes public space even though it's privately owned. And that's a space that people can gather in Palm Beach, which is a very rare place. There aren't many places that are served by cafes and restaurants that are essentially public spaces, and that's what's been created by this design. And so I think ultimately, if this is approved by you today, it's a building that will make a long-lasting contribution to Palm Beach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mills. Any questions, panel members?
Yeah, I do have some architectural ones. I guess in terms of when I just noted from where you put the other plans up, the floor to ceiling heights, one of the questions that I had with this proposal was why the floor to floor heights so high to get the 2.7 metre ADG requirement for floor to ceiling height. Typically, as you know, in most schemes for apartment buildings, we would see somewhere around 305031 floor to floor. You've got a bit high. You've got 27 plus another 600, so 33. on the first floor. I think it might even be the second floor. You can see it on the section plans. I mean, I'm just looking at the height of this. Obviously, the bulk of the roof, it's a lot higher than the roof and height of Barrenjoey House, and from what you've shown us, it's also higher than what the current approval was. Is there an opportunity for further reduction in the height of the building, given obviously that we've got this area at the front that's also subject to a 4.6 variation, where you can still achieve the 2.7, but rather than having the 600, you have, you know, something a bit lower, which is generally around that 350, 400. I just wonder what's driving the greater height of each floor level compared to what a typical scheme would be.
Yeah, I think you've raised a really important question. This is not an investor grade quality building. This is a building built to last. And one of the ingredients of that is space for services, proper services that don't erode the ceiling height below those mandatory ceiling heights. So if a space of 3.1 metres floor to floor does not create anything but investor grade quality buildings. And so this building is slightly taller to give room for proper services which don't erode into those ceiling spaces, which is the difference between an owner-occupier apartment and an investor grade apartment. And if it's owner-occupied, then the building will be maintained through the generations because it's owner-occupied. It's not occupied by renters with distant property owners who really want to spend the least on maintenance and things like that. So in other words, it's an ecosystem we're creating. And ceiling heights and space for services is a fundamental part of that ecosystem.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I don't know if Mr. Boston wants to add to that, but we've seen like hundreds, if not thousands, of residential apartment buildings that are of all different scales, and it's not just the high-rise, what you're saying, investor grade, and they don't have that floor-to-floor height. But I don't know, Mr. Boston.
Yeah, sure. So look, I think the slab that you're talking about is that second floor slab.
Yeah.
The levels below that are effectively established by the flood planning level, and then just ceiling heights in that lower commercial space. What's primarily driving it is the building commissioner changes for Class 2 buildings, and I think it's generally accepted that the 3.1, which is the recommended ADG ceiling heights, just aren't sufficient in terms of providing necessary step downs and also to get adequate services in. I don't know if you've been into recently constructed RFBs where approvals were at 3100. It's all strip lighting. There's no sort of concealed lighting at all in ceilings, and there's bulkheads for air conditioning and so forth. So it's driven primarily from a buildability point of view. There's no desire to push the floor levels up for extra views. There's extra construction cost associated with that thickness, but we believe that it's not an unreasonable thickness under the circumstances. So that's what's driving it. And the difference between the ADG and what's proposed is 200 mils. I think there's a 600 void and a 2.7 ceiling height. Ordinarily, that would be 2.7 plus 400 for structure. So that the difference, I guess, between the ADG and what's proposed is 200, which really does go towards this buildability issue.
So I guess if it was to be approved, you wouldn't be satisfied if there was a condition reducing the floor heights in this case, from what I've heard.
Oh, look, it would compromise buildability. I'm obviously in the panel's hands, but I also know that the council has been trying to keep this building down as low as possible in terms of achieving flood planning and then also ADG and buildability. And I hope that the panel can look at the design and the quality of the design and the quality of the finishes and understand that buildability was something that was looked at up front. My client wants to push on and start building, whether it's the previous approval or this one. He simply can't hold on to the site in a vacant form any longer. So it's been really designed to be able to go straight into construction without having to come back with a modification.
I have one further question. I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but I think it's worth it. It's a significant development. Rob, with the balconies at the front, the balustrading, and then the series of columns, I'm just interested in understanding whether you looked at different forms there of balustrade and column design. Was this something that's driven by your design, or is it something that's come from your work with the heritage consultants and the advisory panel?
Ada, could you please put up the facade?
Yeah.
Cara,
Reshare
thank you.
screen.
Thanks for asking.
And I guess in terms of that, I was just wanting to understand if you had considered something that was a little bit more of a, like, I guess, lightweight, or what's driving this type of balustrading compared to something that might be a little bit more recessive.
This building's influenced by traditional architecture built over the centuries, and what that's taught us, as I as a keen student of the history of architecture, is depth. A building with some depth, where the windows are set back behind veranda elements, and there's a colonnade of columns which creates a rhythm. It's something that's familiar to us all. We've seen it in our travels, in our studies. It's an important architectural detail in creating the character of the building. We find if we stripped away those verandas and the columns and left you with the facade with maybe a cantilevered balcony, it would become immediately a contemporary building. And we were strongly encouraged by the senior members of the Palm Beach community to work in a traditional style. If you ever had the time to study my work, you'd see that we do very contemporary buildings and we do very traditional buildings. I think it was one of the reasons why our client chose us, was experience and skill at designing buildings for the year 2023 that are born from traditional influences. So, for instance, this is a role model for the building we've designed. Mm-hmm. And does that answer your question, Cara?
Yes, it does, and I guess it does. It when you see it in a colour scheme like this, it is quite different to what we have before us, and I think that's where I guess this has more of a coastal character to it. So perhaps that's why there's that condition to do with the heritage condition. Maybe that's what they're trying to get to.
Well, actually, on that subject, we did have some of those details you see in that reference photograph. Ada, if you could go back to it. But interestingly, Bob Moore asked us to remove them. He felt it was too traditional. It was too like. He wanted the building to have a year 2023 character, and so we removed some of those details. And then, if I could clarify, we have submitted to council, and I believe Bob Moore's reviewed all the finishes, colours, and so on. And I think it's part of one of the reasons he supported the design.
Yeah, I think that's subject to the conditions, so that's why I guess. I was not sure whether he meant from that, for instance, when you look at the montage, that you've got a contrast between the colour of the balustrade and the facade. So maybe we could, in our post meeting determination, when we can ask technical questions of the council officers, we can get some clarity from council's heritage officer in relation to that and the condition.
Ada, could you go back to the approved? So Greg's right. Greg's right when he says our client, after 2.5 years of actively pursuing this, he is now out of time, and that's what he has a DA for. So with luck today, we're going to win the hearts and the minds of everybody and move on from this and build what we believe is a building that will make a great contribution.
Okay, look, I think that we might have to wind it up there. Can I thank the speakers for their comments, and for those who didn't hear Annalise early in the morning, we will make our decision that will be available on the council website, hopefully within the next couple of days. So thank you again for your input, everyone, including the objectors. So we will now call Annalise back and process on with the rest of the business paper. So thank you again, everyone who attended.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Graham. I'll call Annalise back into the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome back, Annalise.
So is that item finished now, Graham?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. All right,
You're back on deck.
Yeah, I'm back on deck.
I'm
All right, so the next
electronically handing you the baton back.
Thank you very much. So 4.2389 Pittwater Road, North Manly. And we have few objectors wishing to speak. I'll just reiterate what I said in my opening, is that we have received all your submissions and late submissions. So if you can ensure that you don't repeat what previous speakers have said. So the first speaker is Mr. Richard Gatt, if you're there.
Hello, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so I think we obviously made a submission and there was a response, I think, that council. And really, I'm from myself and my family live at 8A Palm Avenue, so we back on to, I suppose, adjacent to the both either the subdivisions, both the plots and the redevelopment site. So really, we just made an observation about the access to the car park and access to our property. And I think the response from the council was that that wasn't actually being considered, but that this particular DA, any changes to that car parking. But I'd just like to, I suppose, reiterate that we just got some access to that area. Currently, I think it suits one vehicle. I don't think there was a proposal for a passing of two vehicles into that car park or any pedestrian access. I suppose we're just a little bit concerned from that. We just got when those changes do happen, we've got a couple of small kids. They come in and out of that car park, and we just need and we've got obviously vehicle access through there. We just want to make sure that that is taken into consideration with when the other DA is considered around the redevelopment. Obviously, this subdivision was suggesting some changes to that to those existing plots where the redevelopment is going to take place.
All right, thank you. Any questions from panel members?
No.
No.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next speaker, Jennifer Hamlin.
Panel Chair, I just got an email from Ms. Hamling, and Richard was speaking on her behalf as well. Is that correct, Mr. Dart?
Yeah, that's my partner. She's not allowed.
Yes, yeah, I can see that you're from the same address, so thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
Sean Fry.
Hi there, thank you. I've got a pre-prepared address that was done before I knew our town planner, James Lovell, was available. He will be speaking, but I might just get through my address and then, but hopefully there's no double ups between what we wanted to say. So firstly, I'd like to thank the panel for their time. I'm speaking on behalf of over 80 residents from the neighbouring streets of Lakeside Crescent, Riverview Parade and Palm Avenue. We are all generally unhappy that the applicant is, via two separate DAs, proposing to extend the existing building excuse me, by effectively adding a third level and squeeze in 37 non-compliant residential dwellings in an area zoned low density residential, while selling off land that should be retained for car parking spaces that we all know the future residents will require, and most importantly, maintaining setbacks to a building that is already out of character from the surrounding area. Our key point for the panel today is that we're all a bit perplexed that the subdivision DA is being put forward for approval and is not being considered, not being assessed concurrently with the main reuse DA, as they are intrinsically related to each other. We're also surprised that after raising our concerns with this development for well over 2 years, that we're only given 1 week's notice of this meeting, and more importantly, Council's recommendation to approve this subdivision DA in isolation. Furthermore, we found out by default via the office of our local minister, James Griffin, that Council have apparently advised the applicants that the main reuse DA will be refused, to which the applicant declared that it is now a Crown development and will now be referred to the regional planning panel. This staggered and disjointed approach assessment of both DAs does not make any sense to us. As I just noted, we've only had a week to digest Council's assessment report and re-engage with our town planner, James Lovell. As such, we've had limited opportunity to review and digest Council's conclusions. On that subject, I would like to refer to Council's assessment report and notification and submissions received section. From the community submissions, Council has identified a bullet point list of 10 areas of concern, and they have subsequently discussed how these issues have been addressed. This list is a very simplistic and downplayed summary covering items raised by the common person. It does not properly address the technical town planning issues raised in the various reports issued by James Lovell, and in particular his report submitted to Council in June 2022. For example, the Council does not appear to address the fact that after subdivision, the existing building will exceed the FSR controls referred to in SEP Housing for Seniors of People with Disability 2004. One of the community issues noted by the Council is subdivision won't fit within the character of the area. This quote may have been taken out of context, as I'd like to suggest that the community overall would certainly support the subdivision of the entire site into standard low density residential lots in conjunction with demolition of the existing building. From the community's perspective, the main planning issue that we would like to note is that when the original building was constructed in an area zoned low density residential, an appropriate amount of open space and setback was provided to help offset the impact of a large incongruous building located among surrounding standard residential dwellings. The subdivision and inevitable development of the lots in question will completely change the visual relationship between the existing building and the surrounding properties. This will be exacerbated if the applicant is successful in adding a third floor and the reuse DA. Historically, it would appear the original site area and open space was dedicated to the Queenscliff Community Health Centre facility as a concession to a development that was non-compliant in residential zoning and out of character with the area. Logically, it does not make sense to allow subdivision of over 1/3 of the land, which will aggravate the town planning issues associated with the existing building. It is therefore our opinion that this there is a fundamental relationship between both development applications, as confirmed by the numerous issues identified by our expert town planner James Lovell, and it's completely inappropriate for the two DAs to be assessed, considered and determined independently. We therefore ask that the panel reject the Council's recommendation to approve the application for subdivision and have it assessed concurrently with the main reuse DA. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. We'll hear from Mr. Lovell next, and then if there's any questions from the panel, they can ask both you and Mr. Lovell after we've heard from him. So, Mr. Lovell?
Madam Chair, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Madam Chair and panel members. Could I just confirm that you received a copy of some late correspondence from me dated the 14th of February 2023?
Yes.
So, that was received?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so I'll be very brief because I don't want to repeat the comments that I've made in that, but the fundamental concern is that this application is being considered separately and independently of the DA for the adaptive reuse and expansion of the retained building on the site. And I think the reasons why I think that's problematic are set out in my correspondence of the 14th of February 2023. And I think subsequent to that, as Mr. Fry mentioned, we now also understand that the Council does not support the DA for the adaptive reuse and expansion of the retained building on the site. So in dealing with the subdivision application, it sets in place a framework that is very problematic in terms of the reuse of the retained building. And for that reason and others, I think that it's absolutely essential that these DAs be considered concurrently. In fact, I'd go a step further. I don't understand why the DAs would have been lodged as separate DAs. It would be ordinarily and much more straightforward and logical that they be dealt with as a single DA. But if they are to be dealt with as two separate DAs, because the matters are so intrinsically linked, I believe that they should be considered and assessed and determined concurrently. And I'm otherwise available to answer any questions.
Right, thank you. So, panel members, any questions of the last two speakers?
No.
No. All right, thank you. So we'll now hear from the applicant. We have two speakers, both representing Landcom. So Julian Sneed.
Thank you. You got me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we have. Yes.
All good. Okay, thank you for listening to us today. So this subdivision is the initial stage in the redevelopment of the former Queenscliff Health site, which has been purchased by Landcom. The proposed subdivision provides for compliant residential lots and the redevelopment of Lot 1, which is the subject of a separate development application, which is yet to be determined. Those applications have been framed that way for ongoing operational purposes. The subdivision will be separate to the adaptive reuse of the site, of the remainder of the site. So the proposal for the panel today is as a Crown DA, and Landcom has been provided with and agreed to all the conditions of consent, with there being a late adjustment, which I understand was made last night, and the panel should have been informed of by the council staff relating to access. And Bill and I are available if you have any questions at all.
All right, thank you. So Bill's not speaking, he's just available for questions.
That's right.
Okay, so in terms of the specific issues that were raised by the objectors in relation to why the DAs are separate, particularly given, I think, the concern that if it's subdivided, that the size of the new development and its need for parking is uncertain. It's dependent on that DA being approved in the form that is proposed. And I understand that council's raising some issues in terms of flooding, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no certainty about that DA being approved for that use, and potentially any other use if it's an adaptive reuse, could require greater parking. So can you just explain the logic behind having them as separate applications?
Why they are separate? Okay, so they're separate DAs because ultimately one deals with subdivision and the other deals with the adaptive reuse, and into the future they will be operated independently of one another. The adaptive reuse DA, that is before council has compliant car parking provided on it. We don't have the benefit of the council officer's report, and this is just a circumstance. There's Landcom has lodged both applications concurrently as requested by council, and that is why the earlier subdivision application was actually withdrawn. This is a resubmission of that earlier application so that they could be dealt with concurrently, and unfortunately both of them got different approval pathways.
So in terms of this panel making a decision in with a degree of certainty as to what's going to be on the community centre site, what's your opinion about essentially us deferring this matter until that decision is made so that we then know what that future lot will be used for and its ability to cope with its any parking that's generated from it, et cetera,
Well, the proposal is compliant as it's submitted. There is no issue as to whether it would require additional car parking. It's actually a compliant development, and essentially the risk sits with Landcom as to whether they can proceed with this subdivision, in line with what might happen with the other DA, or what they can do with the adaptive reuse site.
And just another question. The subdivision of the 3 lots for single dwelling houses relies on having combined access off Pittwater Road. As I understand it, it's sort of, at the moment there's no trees proposed to be removed, although I'd like to have your confirmation that that's the case, that any of the driveways that are being provided as part of this subdivision likely to result in any tree removal.
Yes, so the underlying, the previous use of the site was essentially a commercial development, operating as a health facility. So there are large portions of car park that will be removed, and and this actually enables the additional landscaping and planting of trees to be provided from what is the existing development of the site.
Okay, but in terms of the actual subdivision and the extent of access, car parking access, there's no tree removal required under this application, but potentially under an application for the dwellings, there may be further tree removal, but that will require a separate approval.
Can I just defer to Bill on those particular details?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm happy to clarify. There is some removal of trees as part of these works. Is this in the subdivision DA? That's all been outlined in the plans that have been sent in. And can I also add that the car park matter, in relation to the other DA, is dealt with on page 159 of the report, and council have confirmed there that the adaptive reuse that's proposed does meet the car park compliance for that proposed development. Again, probably reiterate what Julian just said, that the risk is on Landcom, that if that isn't approved, then obviously other uses need to be explored. But if, for example, that was to be an alternate subdivision, we probably couldn't do anything less than what's been proposed with the 3 lots on Pittwater Road. They're DCP compliant. They meet the minimum lot area, and council have also confirmed in the report that the diagrams we provided will give sufficient floor area for any proposed housing that might go in that area. I hope that clarifies.
In terms of the extent of tree removal, where is that? Can you point us to exactly where that would be in the documentation for this DA?
think it is dealt with, unless to find it, page 163 of our report. Under, I mean, there are some, I guess, there's a little bit of confusion around this.
Because there's the condition saying no removal.
That does indicate that there are 4 trees proposed to be removed as part of the subdivision application and supported by Council's landscape officer. But what the landscape officer is also saying is that the indicative building layout plans that Landcom has submitted would otherwise show a number of other trees that would need to be removed to facilitate the access to those new lots and such building envelopes. So there's 5 forest oaks, 1 cheese tree, 1 Canary Island palm and 1 firewheel tree. But what Council's landscape officer has done in our report has said they don't support the removal of those trees and that should be a future DA, should be assessed at future DA stage. I guess the question of certainty comes up though if we're approving a subdivision, the panel needs to consider the building footprints that are put forward in terms of the justification if the trees are not proposed to be removed now, but it's likely that they will have to be removed to facilitate the access that's proposed. That's something that is relevant to this consideration.
Yeah, it's also that we have a condition 9 that says under the subdivision application, no prescribed trees are permitted to be removed. So even though it's in the application and is needed by this application to remove 4 trees, as I understand it, there's a condition that then says you can't do it. So I think that's something we need to look up.
It lists those 4 trees in that condition too. So, but yes, no, I mean, I agree. I think it's not exactly clear on exactly what trees are being approved and what trees might not be approved to be removed here, but by virtue of approving the subdivision and the access points, there will be no choice for them to be removed. So it's probably just understanding that in a bit more detail. I mean, that's only indicative, I assume, Julian, at the moment. That would be subject to another application, but it seems from the application that the access from Pittwater Road and the adjoining road is what's proposed. So you're not looking at any kind of battle axe driveway coming from the rear. Okay.
No, the joint driveway was a response to the RMS to minimise access points to Pittwater Road. So that's why it was located on the common boundary between the 2 properties. The third new lot, or the lot 4 that's been created, has access directly off Lakes Avenue via the existing driveway that's there for the old car park. Landcom's not intending to develop the 3 sites. It's purely a subdivision, GCP compliant subdivision. The plans that are submitted, like any other subdivision, like any other vacant land created, will need to be lodged by the future owners of the site, and those final dwelling designs are to be decided by those future purchasers and submitted to council, and will follow due process. Again, I don't see why we in a subdivision scenario that the future owners may be able to come up with a solution that retains most of the trees. Keep in mind that most of the trees are around the perimeter of the site. I'm sure you've been out to inspect that most of the trees are around the perimeter of the site and will stay in most of the setback buffers.
So it's correct. Can we just get some clarity probably from the Pittwater Road, the joint driveway that obviously you said the RMS have supported? Does this proposal for subdivision, does that include presumably it doesn't include the driveway works because it would have had to deal with the tree removal, but does it include approval for the drive access from Pittwater Road in the location that the RMS have approved? Is there any works that's part of the subdivision in relation to obviously identifying exactly where that drive would go to give some indication of what flexibility there may be in the future?
I would say that the driveway being one common point can only be at the midpoint of lots 2 and 3, or at the common boundary between 2 and 3, and the driveway will be will be located so it's middle of that. There is a turning template that was provided to demonstrate that it works. We only intend to build enough to enable there's a little bit of right of way to enable that turning to occur, and that's the minimum amount that we feel we need to build to create that right of way. It's not to build the full driveway and turning template. It was only indicative, and that I think a future condition of consent for any of those housing lots will be that the cars enter and leave in a forward motion, and that will be part of what needs to be determined at the point that those housing plans are submitted. But that's not what this DA is about. This DA is purely a subdivision DA, and it meets the minimum lot area requirements, and we've dealt with the traffic matters to RMS's satisfaction.
So what is the extent of access that you will be constructing under this application? Where can we find that?
That would be on one of the plans. I think it might be the second plan in the IDG. So let me it might be if you look at the plan, that might be the end of the report in the papers.
Yep.
On page 195.
195, you will see a common driveway off Pittwater Road and a hatched area.
Yes.
It would probably be no more than the hatched area, and you can see that it's clear of all the plotted trees.
Okay, so it's just that hatched area that will be constructed as part of this application.
Correct. Wording of the DA consent was sufficient to enable that, the hatched area, which is the right-of-way area, to allow cars to swing in. And both ways. It might not be constructed as exactly as a hatch. I'd say that to make it easier to abut, it might be a square or made more regular. But there's a condition of consent that covers that, and we need to submit those details once that's been designed.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from panel members?
No, thank you.
No.
No.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our questions of you. And the next item is item 4.3, 60 Federal Parade, Brookvale. So it's for 2 car parks and an increase in student numbers to the school. And we have Paul Stevens speaking.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
All right. So I'm not trying to rehash anything. The school has increasing student numbers, which is my main concern, and just with this reapplication of increasing numbers up to 1,600 over the years, they have completely disregarded their current allowance. So they've currently been allowed up to 1,200 students, which they now, as of 2022, it says their list of students is at 1,540. That's up to 2022. I do question or wonder what their current student numbers are, as of since they're already in breach by such a massive amount. So that's already in breach over 340 students. The My Schools website, if you go back to 2013, when their allowance was up to 1,200, by 2014 they were already in breach by 8 student numbers. I guess my concern is just the continued lack of concern for the student numbers. They just continue to grow. It is a commercial site. They are, each student is worth around $16,500 per year. So just that breach alone, the school collecting close to an extra $6 million a year just by breaching this. this deferred allowance, allowing the school to increase to 1,600, they seem to already be there anyway, with little and no concern for that effects to the surrounding properties. I guess as a concerned resident, I'd like to see that there would be some sort of breach in place, like with a developer. When they develop a site, there's conditions put on them in regards to trees and so on. If they to damage a tree, there's a monetary value put on it or something like that. With the school, they breach. There seems over the years, and it's been a continued problem. There just is no ramification. They just continue to breach, and then worst case scenario for them, they're issued with an order like they were with this time, and then it takes them a couple of years to get around to a panel like this or an approval by the council. Yes,
I'll just have to interrupt you there because you are over time.
Yeah.
So is there any other point that you wish to make, or?
Yeah, just the illegal use of property. So in their plan, they've shown that they are using 35 Consul Road, which is rear to my house. This is not a educational facility. And then they also have they've claimed that they're not using any of these properties that they have purchased. They're going to leave them as residential properties. They've been using it as a storage facility, which to me is a fire hazard. They are also using it. They've just, as of December, they have had data cabling and electrical cabling run between the school and this property, with no, again, no approval for such, which just leaves me again concerned that they have little and no regard for the approval process or the ramification on the neighbouring properties.
All right. I'll just see if panel members have got any questions for you.
Just one question. What sort of impacts does it create for you, Mr. Stevens?
So the impacts on student numbers is it creates traffic problems, noise problems, all these sort of things. The impacts of the buildings that they have done through complying design over the years as well. I now have a 15-metre high building located very close to me. Which is not nice. It's a wall of glass that looks in on my children's bedrooms, which is a problem. If they continue to expand, I can't help but feel that I'm going to have that across the side of me and across the back of me in a short space of time.
All right, thank you. The next speaker is John Trzewski. I haven't pronounced it correctly, but.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I've been following this development for quite some time because I live directly across the road from the complying development that was added to the school several years ago, where the circular that was provided to the neighbours informed the neighbours that there was to be no increase to the student numbers. However, as Paul previously has mentioned, they continue to grow their numbers. Now, the impacts directly to me are noise. The acoustic report that was submitted by the applicant and reviewed by the council did not take into account the new building that has been added, particularly the rooftop terrace. That didn't exist when that acoustic report, which was based on a report that was, the readings were taken in 2012. Now there's directly across the road from me, some 40 metres away, a rooftop terrace. That is used during the evenings as well as during the day with amplified music, functions, holding functions with large numbers of people in the evenings, as well as students and I mean adolescent boys enjoying a healthy game of table tennis, which is great, but they're very close to my bedroom. There's a lot of shouting and yelling and so on. So there's not, it is an acoustic problem that has not been addressed in that survey at all, because didn't take into account the development. Also, as Mr. Stevens has mentioned, there isn't any provision, what is there? There's nothing in the management plan that mentions how the school will maintain their numbers at the cap should this go ahead. They have, it seems that the school has increased their numbers and try to play catch up. The council, in my view, has had adequate opportunity over 4 years to address the increase, but nothing has happened. Apart from some a little bit of non-compliance, but a lot of it's waiting. And during this waiting game, the school has continued to increase the numbers, almost being very disrespectful to the provisions that the compliant provisions have been placed on, and also to the community. For a school that has the governance as a value, as a core value, it seems that they don't appreciate and don't respect their requirements. Thirdly, traffic and safety. I still continue to observe today parents dropping off the boys and stopping in non-stopping areas alongside the school zones to drop off across driveways, boys crossing roads, and that continues to happen. So and look, it's a traffic problem, and it's due to inadequate places or drop off, because there's a lot of queuing, and also I mean, I've seen at other schools they provide or they allow police to monitor that, and I haven't seen any monitoring by police here to control the behaviour of the parents who are jeopardising the safety of their kids by dropping them off in these no stopping zones. So apart from that, that's all the points I'd like to make that I don't feel that were adequately addressed in the council's report. Are there any questions?
Any questions, panel members?
No, not from me, thank you.
No, thank you.
I've got a question. So you mentioned the building with the terrace. When did that start operating?
Around 2019, 2020. I don't recall exactly when, but it was. It could have been 2019. I know they were building it for a year. It was supposed to be a compliant development, so it's out of sort of. In a way, they're not acting in the spirit of the complying development provisions.
No, that's okay. That's fine. I just wanted to find out when it was done.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the traffic and parking, you said there was no monitoring by police. Are there traffic wardens?
Not where potentially there. I haven't seen any. Not where the no stopping areas are, where the parents are dropping off their kids.
And what about in drop-off zones?
There are in the drop-off zones. There's wardens in the drop-off zones, and that's fine. But that's a safe area. That pull into the drop-off zone. But it's where the drop-off zones don't exist, and that's where the safety issues are.
All right. Thank you. Now, and we have Gillian Sneed on behalf of the owners of 31 Consul Road. If you're there.
Yes, back again.
Back again.
Repeat offender today. Okay, so I represent the owners of 31 Consul Road, Brookvale. The college site is located to the rear and to the north of their residential property boundary. This DA has been lodged in response to identification by the adjoining residents and ultimately in council in 2020 that the college had breached the enrolment cap of 1,200 students. This DA seeks to regularise that. The application has been amended several times since it's been submitted. And as a result, I've made 4 submissions on behalf of my client. The initial DA submission provided for additional car parking on 60 Federal Road and on the southeastern corner of the college site, with access from Alfred Road and exiting to Gulliver Street. The DA has been submitted as a piecemeal proposal. Even the site description on the agenda does not identify the main college site. It suggests that it's only 60 Federal, but in fact, it is far more than that. The traffic and parking generated by the college is the most obvious impact of the additional student numbers and an ongoing amenity impact for the neighbourhood. Acoustic impacts and operational matters equally impact on the residential amenity of our client's property and the adjoining residents. The recommendation before the panel today seeks to grant a deferred commencement consent and leaves fundamental matters of a Section 4.15 assessment as the subject of additional information to be submitted. Despite the college having breached the student cap since before 2020, this deferred commencement consent enables the ongoing breach of student numbers to a cap of 1560 until such time that the deferred commencement conditions are satisfied, a period of up to 2 years. The consent does not indicate how further breaches will be managed. The student enrolments provided for 2020 and 2022 have increases across all year groups. The simple introduction of an additional Year 5 class of 30 once this consent is enacted would amount to a total enrolment of 1620 in the following year. So if Year 5 transfers into Year 6, you're going to end up with a breach already, and presumably they could reduce their Year 7 intake, but you've already got cohorts running through. So data available from the college and the My School website indicates there's been an increase in numbers of 78 in 2021 and 68 in 2022. So this consent only leaves them with 40 students from what they've already got. The deferred commencement conditions are not sufficiently certain or final. The use of 33 Consul Road remains unclear. So 33 Consul Road has been approved as part of the school site in a previous DA, but there has never been any use of that land identified other than it was going to be used for construction of the complying development building to the rear, so the dwelling house was demolished in 2018 and it's remained unstabilised without any vegetation or any proposed use since that time. So whilst that land is very likely to be the subject of a future complying development certificate through the infrastructure SEP, this DA represents a lost opportunity to provide some clarity and amenity protections for the adjoining neighbours. There's no assessment of the acoustic impact of the additional student numbers, and the draft consent conditions don't require landscaping or even stabilisation. The dwelling, I've said that. The submission of the deferred commencement requirements will not enable review by the adjoining residents or any adjustment of the operational conditions. There are matters within the deferred commencement conditions, including acoustic and traffic managements, that should be contained within the operational conditions. The DA as submitted provides for inconsistencies, and inadequate information, which is clearly identified within the report. The deferred commencement consent recommended to the panel is inconsistent with the need for a consent to be certain and contrary to the Department of Planning and Environment 2021 Guide to Writing Conditions of Consents for Deferred Commencement Conditions. We would request the deferral of the determination to enable submission of all the material identified in the deferred commencement consent and review of all the material by the adjoining residents, council and the panel prior to determination.
Thank you. Any questions from the panel?
Yes, I do, Annalise. Janine, just in relation to the, is it number 33, that console roll, that
Yes.
where it's been demolished? So did they, obviously to use the infrastructure set before, it's already got to be within the boundaries of an existing educational establishment. So are you saying that they had an approval, a DA already for change of use, recognising that it would be used as an educational establishment upon which they can rely on the other provisions in the future?
The site, so the previous DA that included 33 Consul Road, didn't make, it included some other pieces of land that the school had acquired around the site. And each one of those was required to be landscaped or grassed, or or there was a future plan for it. 31 Consul Road was proposed to be used as a construction access for a future building. So the building was demolished and it was accepted as being a school site, but there's never been any landscaping put on there, which is quite clear from a review of aerial photos.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. So we have two people on behalf of the applicant, Piers Hempel and Ellen Robertson. Shaw. I understand you're here to answer questions rather than speak. Is that correct?
That's correct, Madam Chair. Yes, and unfortunately, Piers was called to another meeting, so it's me. I also have representatives from the college, Anthony Bataille, who is the business manager, and Greg Yates, and also here to assist the panel if they have any questions. Michael Kirkby from APG, the project managers for this assisting the college, and also Mike Staunton. So if the panel have any questions of the college or myself, more than happy to answer them. But where the college is happy with the recommendation in the council officers' report, there's been ongoing dialogue with council officers during the preparation of the application, and that has resulted in additional information being provided during the course of council's assessment. It's acknowledged in the council's report, and the college acknowledges it, that yes, there was a breach in the number of enrolled students at the college, and this seeks to rectify that and other issues that have been brought to the college's attention during the course of council's assessment.
All right, thank you. So I understand you have sent in some further information today in response to some questions. So that's just confirming that the student numbers in 2023 are 1560.
That's correct,
and
yes.
The full-time equivalent staff is 152.
Correct.
And the existing spaces are 89 on site, and that with the two additional car parks, that will bring it up by 54 spaces to being a total of 143.
That's correct, Madam Chair. Yes, there is some an acknowledged inconsistency in the original traffic impact assessment, which identified that there were 106 spaces on the college site. My understanding is that counted some, shall we say, unofficial car parking spaces or areas on the site that were being used for car parking. But yes, 89 is the official number of existing car parking spaces.
And the number of students that are authorised to drive to school, I think in the council officer's report it says 25 last year.
That's my understanding. If I could defer to Anthony, he could confirm that for me.
Yes.
Anthony, you're muted.
It's approximately 25. It does vary from year to year, with the approval of the school student school office.
So in terms of the range, what does it vary from, roughly?
Probably that would be on the high side at 25. It just depends on the age of the students as to when they turn the legal age to drive. So I'd say between 25, or probably between 20 and about 28 at the very most.
All right, thank you. And in relation to the concerns raised by Ms. Need in terms of the certainty of the deferred commencement condition, have you got one of your speakers any comments on that?
We're more than happy to work with the council to address the matters raised in the deferred commencement conditions. They are not particularly onerous, and I think it's more a matter of the nuancing of the drafting of the management plans than anything of any import, or sorry, anything deal breakers, shall we say.
So in that sense, how long do you think it would take for those documents to be updated?
I would say maximum probably, I'm going to say four to 6 weeks. I can't speak for the other consultants, so that's my best guess at this point.
All right, and can you just confirm the date of the acoustic report, the assessment, the monitoring that was done on that?
Just bear with me. Apologies. I can pull that up.
It's 2021, Ellen.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
One of the objectors said that the actual monitoring was done in 2012. Is that your understanding?
No, that is not my understanding. No.
Is there somewhere in the report that it confirms the date of monitoring?
I believe it's not in the council officer's report, but I'm just going to ducking into the acoustic assessment. And there it is. The weird and wonderful grass down the back. Just bear with me. The objector may have been referencing other sections in the acoustic report which referenced previous assessments that were done in 2013 and in 2018. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find exactly when these assessments were done. Rather than spend time on that, I'll find it and I'll shoot it through to the panel secretariat or to council officers, and they can pass it on.
Both panel
okay, will do. Yes, apologies, I can't find that immediately at hand. Sorry.
Okay. Other questions from panel members?
No, thank you.
Yeah, Peter. No, you go, Peter.
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry. Peter Cotton here. Just the only question I have is just what are the school's projections for student numbers over the next 3 years, given that you're 60 short of achieving 1,600 students, which is what you're asking for in the approval now?
Anthony, I'll defer to you again if I may. Anthony, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm muting myself. I'm in the middle of the building site at the moment. We would have absolutely no plans to go over the 1600 at this stage. Yeah.
So that's capped 1600.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Harry, you had a question?
Yeah, mine, I just want to talk a little bit more about the car parking, just to get some clarity, and also on the pick up and drop off and how that works, as per what's mentioned in the traffic report. I know the email that's come through. I'm not sure if this is easy to bring stuff on the screen, Heidi, but the plan that's being provided, it obviously, it's indicating that there's 80 existing car parking spaces in the Gulliver Street main car park, which includes 7 car parking spaces along, it looks like at the far end along the edge of the building. And then it also says 4 spaces with use under management from school, which are immediately in front of adjoining parking spaces. Could you just confirm, firstly, that all of those, so the 7, including one accessible, and then the other 4 are line marked car spaces? It's that they're actually approved, that they're as existing spaces, not just parking on the edge of the building.
Harry, is it possible can we bring up a plan so we know we're all talking about the same spaces?
I don't know if Heidi's there, if she could bring up.
I am here, Cara, confirming it's from the master set that was distributed to the panel.
The one that's in the email that came through this afternoon to the panel. So it is from, you've sent it to us, and it's from Piers.
Yes, sure. I will get that up for you right now.
Yeah, might be bringing up.
Oh, it's still embedded in the email.
It's embedded in the email.
Yes, okay, yep. I've got that up. If I can share my screen.
Yes, sure. There is access for you to share your screen.
Just for doing this, and I've got to. How am I going?
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, right. Okay. So you're speaking about these 4 spaces here?
Yes.
Right. Okay. They are currently this is an existing car park which is currently under an older plan of management, which is now captured under the new plan of management, which traffic management plan, I beg your pardon, which will be further updated in response to the deferred commencement conditions. But the 90-degree spaces are occupied by staff who are there on a longer term basis, and those 4 parallel spaces are occupied by staff members who are there on a reduced time frame. But they are approved spaces, and they are captured under the 89 existing spaces on site.
Okay, and then the 7 spaces above that, so there's 1 blue accessible and then 6 next to it. No, sorry, it's in the same car.
These ones here? Yep.
Are they all approved line marked spaces as well?
They are, yes, they are, yes.
Okay, and I guess similarly, the 6 car spaces up top, are they all the same and they're allocated to staff?
They are allocated to staff. I cannot confirm that they are line marked. I'd have to defer to either Greg or Anthony on those ones.
And I guess when I asked about line marked, it's more about have they been assessed and approved as car parking spaces?
All the green circled spaces, the so-called existing, for want of a better word, are the approved spaces under the 2013 consent.
Okay. Okay. And then, so all of those are approved for staff. So I guess with the new 30 space staff car park that's proposed, that would bring it to 119 spaces for staff. So there's still a 33 space shortfall for staff if you apply the DCP criteria.
If you apply the DCP to the letter of the law, yes, there is a shortfall, but there is there's been some quite significant surveying of staff, and there is a proportion of staff that do not drive or carpool, and I believe that is around about the 10%. Yeah.
So there's about 15. So there's now there's still a little bit of a
yes, and others that catch public transport, and others that ride their motorcycles and so forth. So,
given that there is, even with this proposal, there is still a shortfall in parking, has the school considered a car park on that Consul Road, the vacant site, as well, to bring it up?
It's too narrow. That was part of a DA that was later withdrawn. It's just too narrow to be able to get adequate manoeuvring of vehicles on that.
Even to get one row of car parking with a.
Well, it also, I mean, I guess the more car parking, it's appears the age-old argument. I guess the more car parking you provide, the more you get people driving. It's more the school is actively encouraging staff and students to consider more active forms of transport, whether it be public transport, walking, cycling, carpooling. That's I would think that is a better outcome than providing even more car parking at the expense of green space on the site.
I don't think it's green space. It doesn't look like it on there unless it's been converted. In relation to the other question I had is, can you clarify how does the pick up and drop off work, and where is the pick up and drop off zone? Because I got a bit confused. At one stage I got a feeling that cars were actually travelling into the Gulliver Street car park to pick up.
They are. Yeah, I'll get the college to chip in as soon as I make an error here. But my understanding is that the pickup, and that's primarily for the primary age students, but it may also include some high school students. The vehicles that come along Gulliver Street, they enter along here. This area along here is the pickup zone for students, and they exit back onto Gulliver Street here. There is Anthony and Greg, please pipe in when I say the wrong thing. I think there is also a pickup area here. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So how does it work if you've got, are the cars just queuing? Like there's not an actual zone then? How does it work if those 7 spaces at the top, if people are trying to manoeuvre in or out of those spaces in the morning or the afternoon?
Just to confirm, Cara, these are not the line mark car parking is not the pickup areas. It occurs in the aisle.
Yeah, no, I was just checking.
Okay.
How do the cars get in and out of that during the pick-up and drop-off zones?
I will have to defer to the college to answer that question.
Pretty much any staff that are parked in those spaces would definitely have to wait for all students and traffic to have cleared, because we don't. At the dismissal time, staff generally do not leave. So there's probably up to 15, 20 minutes before staff commence to depart. And teachers who were parked there would definitely not even attempt to leave during that time.
Are they allocated, or is it just first in, first served in terms of which space you get each day?
Greg, are you aware whether they're allocated?
They're not allocated, no.
And does that drop off, so it just occurs in the aisle, is that all part of, is that part of the 2013 approval?
Yes, it is.
Right.
And the cars that are parked in those areas are people who only work part-time or who work as a music tutor or work in the canteen, and they're gone by the pick-up and drop-off times.
And so can you just explain to us, because obviously every school's a little bit different, how does it work? If you're coming to pick up your child, have you got, I mean, every school's different. Can you just take us through how your system actually works?
Yes, I can. So at 3:15 of an afternoon, Year 5 students are dismissed, and they are escorted to the pick-up and drop-off zone in that area that you're talking about. And we have a traffic warden there, and we also have the principal of the primary school directing students to get into their car. They then exit, as Ellen said there, and off they go. At 3:25, the Year 6 students are dismissed, and that alleviates quite a fair bit of congestion in that area. In the red zone in Alfred Road, there, maroon sort of zone, we have a teacher on duty out there, and kids are received right where that cursor is right now. Kids picked up by parents there, and then up the top of the screen there in Federal Parade.
Sorry, just on that part where you said the maroon, the key to that, it says no parking 8 to 9 a.m, 3 to 4 p.m. school days. Is that because it's a designated pickup area?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
During those times. Okay. So wherever we see the purple, that's indicative
and that's
of it being...
That's another area up the top there, yeah. Exactly the same process. And the buses, the students are assembled on the College Oval, and in the blue zone there on Alfred Road is where they enter from some gates and get onto the school bus.
So when are all the other students released?
3:25.
So Year 6 is at 3:25, but they go into the car park that you mentioned.
Yep. Yes.
And then all the other students go to the bus or one of those purple areas.
Yes.
Okay. So Gulliver Street is only for the Year 5 and Year 6 students?
That's correct.
Yes.
But I guess if you've got a sibling, they're allowed to use as well. Okay.
That's understandable. Yeah.
Okay.
And the yellow dots, they're all indicative of where you've got wardens.
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
The assessment report also, Council's assessment, is supporting prioritising the federal parade car park for students and not for staff. And I know the DCP has got one car space per staff member and then a reasonable amount of student parking. There obviously is a shortfall even with this proposal of staff parking. I'd just like to hear your response on the prioritisation for the student spaces over the staff spaces, whether you support Council's assessment to provide these 24 spaces only for the senior students, or whether in your experience there is still a demand for staff spaces that could either partially or fully be accommodated by being able to use these spaces.
the initial development application submission identified those spaces for staff. We as in the college don't necessarily believe it's that student car parking should be encouraged, shall we say, and that's why those yellows, or shall we say, what colour would you call them, orange zones, shall we say, have been designated along Federal Parade specifically for students who drive. I guess the college we think it's probably preferable that it's staff parking to avoid the need for students having to cross Federal Parade. But if it's it really, I mean, we think there's enough staff parking as it is, but if that's the shall we say deal breaker, the college is prepared to accept the Federal Parade parking as student parking.
Okay, so you're open to that. In practical terms, does it need to be either staff or student, or could it work practically as a combination?
I think that may be difficult from a management perspective. I would again defer to the college on that one. I would say it's preferable to one or the other, but I would let Greg or Anthony perhaps answer that one.
It'd definitely be preferable that it was staff parking, just given that some staff, mothers who need to get away quite early to pick up young children, etc. It would be the college's preference that it was staff parking. And again, as Ellen said, to discourage student driving.
There's no pedestrian crossing there, is there, on that street?
No.
No, there's not.
And I guess year 12 students can come and go at different times. So you couldn't even necessarily always have a warden there at certain times because they can be finishing a class and leaving at a different time, I understand. So, okay.
Yeah, with year 12, if they've got study in the afternoon after lunch, they're allowed to leave, so they're not part of the traffic flow of an afternoon. And that'd be quite a significant number of year 12s who on different afternoons would be able to leave before dismissal time.
So how could safety be managed if it's a designated student car park where the students have to cross the road into the school?
I guess you could make that case in point about any student walking to school from another area. I mean, Federal Parade, from what I've experienced, is not a particularly busy road. Yes, it is busy. It just does carry traffic, obviously, around the peak pick up and drop off times. But it would just have to rely on the students demonstrating some road sense to cross into the school. There is a gate in this area that they could immediately cross into. So it's not as if they've got to walk a whole way around the block.
And is that gate open during all school hours?
No, it's locked.
It's locked, okay.
Yes, yeah.
So where would they?
But it's open. It's open for. Sorry, Anthony, beg your pardon. You go on.
And there's a pedestrian gate that the students can access using cards.
Where's the pedestrian gate?
Right next to the driveway gate.
Up here.
In that purple zone.
Oh, okay.
Oh, beg your pardon. Up here. There we go.
There's a pedestrian gate there, and then there's a driveway gate.
Okay. All right, thank you. No more questions on this.
All right, and just specifically in terms of the deferred commencement condition, there were proposed changes to the traffic and transport and parking management plan. You've already mentioned your opinion about the federal street not being used only for students. It also was, presumably on that basis, was also proposed that it be used 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday only and not used outside those hours. So, and I'm not sure about the other car parking, the existing car parking, presumably that's open whenever, there's no restriction on when it can be used.
That is my understanding, Anthony. Is that correct? This is the building, the existing car parking off Gulliver Street.
Gulliver Street, yes. There's no restrictions on that.
Okay. And so restricting the hours of operation of the one or two new car parking, any comments on that?
That causes us, the college, no issues.
Okay. And also there was a part of it saying that the car parks in Federal and Alfred Road are not to be used during sports and special events. Any comments on that?
Well, I guess yes, no issues with that. No, it's only available if it's only available during the school days between 7 and 6. There is no. My understanding is the college has no issue with that.
Yeah, the only issue is on a number of evenings, and we thought it would actually be possible that, you know, if we have parent-teacher interviews, for example, that we would actually be using these car parks, but if the council says no, we thought it would actually benefit the area.
The acoustic report has considered their use beyond 6 p.m. and has found that there are no acoustic issues.
Okay. And there was another thing.
The only other thing is also the
you go ahead.
Condition 3.
Are we talking the deferred commencement conditions?
No.
Yeah.
Operation now. Sorry.
Oh, beg your pardon. Okay.
So both car parks shall be fully constructed and operational within 6 months of the date of the operational consent. So obviously that means as soon as the consent's issued, you need to move into obviously planning for construction. 6 months. You've looked at that. That's all feasible.
So my reading of that condition was that the increase in student numbers up to 1,600 could not occur until such time as those car parking areas were operational.
Well, the car park.
Am I reading that incorrectly?
I read it as, because there's a few different sections there, that the car parks before any increase in student enrollment. So you're saying you're reading it as to get the extra 40 students above the 1,560, you have to do the car parks. Whereas I was reading it that when the consent is issued, that the car parks need to be constructed and operational to get the increase in student numbers overall, which is part of what the proposal is, to get it to either 1,560 or 1,600.
So can I just confirm which condition we're looking at? So
Condition 3
of
the schedule.
Operational condition 3.
It
says both the Federal Parade and Alfred Road car parks shall be fully constructed and operational within 6 months of the date of the operational consent. So as I understand that first part, it would mean that you amend your plans, they get approved by council, and then within 6 months of that, you would have your car parks constructed and operating.
Well, obviously subject to weather events, I don't believe that would be I believe that would be achievable. Yes.
Is the car
And then the second part of it is saying that the car parks shall be fully operational before the increase in student enrolment above the 2020 enrolments.
Oh, that was the one I was speaking. Yes, that was one I was speaking to.
1560.
Yeah.
And once the car parks are constructed, the operational maximum student enrolment is capped at 1,600. So as I interpret that, it means that now you can have your 1560, but you won't get your extra 40 until you've got your car parks in operation.
That was yes, that's my understanding. But yes, the 6 months, to construct the car parking, as I said, subject to the weather behaving, should certainly be achievable.
So what if that's the case? I mean, it's just, I guess, the way that the condition is drafted, and as you can see, we've all had a different interpretation of it. But if the approval was issued and you chose to stay at 1560 students and not increase by another 40 to 1600, does that mean that you wouldn't actually have to build the car parks, whereas the car parks are put forward in support and justification of increasing it to, whether it's 1560 or 1600, it's part of supporting that increase.
Yes, but based on your initial interpretation, they have to be done within 6 months of the consent being operational.
Yeah,
so the car parks are part of the consent, so they would need to be constructed.
Which is, I guess,
it's tricky though, because basically it's sort of the consent's allowing you, as soon as you get your plan of management, etc., done, to operate at 1560. And then it's got this other part of it which says, you've got to build the car park, but you've sort of been able to take up that part of the consent that allows the 1560 to occur. I mean, in some ways it would be better to actually have it that you can operate at, 1560, 1600 as a trial, on a trial basis, and that your actual maximum is capped at the 1200, but you can go up to the 1600 on a trial basis, for 2 years, and within that period you then construct the car park, and then once the car parks are constructed, you can get that then put into place as your cap.
It's certainly the college's intention to construct those car parking spaces as soon as the consent is, commence construction as soon as the consent is operational.
I suppose in terms of having certainty.
Yes, no, I understand. I understand. Yes, I understand the panel's dilemma. So it's perhaps nuancing the drafting thereof. Yeah.
So obviously you've seen the draft conditions. You've got this intention to construct the car park. So presumably you've got a plan or a program of how you're going to facilitate this. I don't know if you've engaged anybody at this stage, but what kind of program advice have you been given in terms of the engagement of the contractors, the delivery? Is it 6 months? Is it less? Is it more?
No, that's okay. Yep. I'll defer to Michael Kirby, who's the project manager for the assisting the college. Michael, has there been any discussion on that relate? Yeah.
So I was interested in that discussion about the 6 months, because 6 months realistically is every bit that this construction will take. So in terms of engagement of consultants, there's been planning done of a layout nature, but not civil planning. So there is still a little bit of time to engage civil consultants and develop the for construction plans. I would say 6 months is a reasonable allowance for the construction of the car parks, but I'd certainly say there's probably a couple of months of design before that 6 months, realistically.
So when the condition's written as 6 months of the date of the operational consent, which that would be the deferred commencement conditions being satisfied to council being satisfied that they've been complied with for want of a better word. You're saying that the 6 months might not be achievable.
I think that's tight. I think the reality is if there was a endorsement by the panel of this proposed consent, what we would do immediately is deal with the 3 deferred commencement conditions and have those matters addressed. At the same time, we would quickly engage the few consultants that are required and commence the civil design process and try to do that concurrently so that shortly after the consent becomes operational, we're in a position to engage contractors. But it would still be tight, I think, realistically.
So it would have been more realistic that within 3 months of the consent being operational, the works have commenced to allow time for civil design and commencement, and then within another 6 months of that, then it needs to be completed.
Yeah, that's certainly far more achievable and far more practical. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay, I've just got one other question. Just now totally gone from my mind. Oh, just in terms of the concerns that have been raised about expansion of the school and the use of 31 Consul Road, etc. I think a number of the objections said about a plan of management for the school, and as I understand it, the school's response was that there are no plans for future development, etc. But that then leaves the site such as 31 Consul Road in limbo.
Sorry to interrupt, Madam Chair. Do you actually mean number 33 Consul?
Is it 33? Yeah,
yes,
sorry, 33.
I think the number 31 is a privately owned residence.
Yes, sorry, 33.
That's okay.
So it sort of leaves that in limbo. So can you just explain, even if there's no increase in numbers, presumably there are sites that are currently in ownership such as 33 that are going to be used for the school. So what is the opposition to doing some sort of plan of management?
There is an operational management plan in place. Do you mean maybe a master plan or a?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Master plan.
Okay. Again, I'll have to defer to Anthony and Greg, but my understanding is the college hasn't quite decided how it might use number 33 Consul Road at this point in time.
Is that correct?
Sorry, Madam Chair, can I just say it's Michael Staunton. In the deferred commencement conditions, there's provision made for amendment of the operational plan of management to cater for that concern. So if there's unforeseen changes or extensions to the school, a requirement for that plan to be updated. So the council actually considered that, so that's how they're catching it. So whatever the school goes to put in under this consent, there'll be a requirement to update that plan of management.
Okay.
So it's in. If you have a look at C, it's in Roman 3.
But that means presumably when 33 Consul Road, in the short term, you would presume that there will be a certain use identified for it, and then these documents that have only just been prepared would need to be updated.
Yeah, that's right. So effectively, if you went and got a CDC to do something on that site, then there would be a requirement for the plan of management to be amended to effectively take into account those impacts.
I think we're talking about two slightly different things, though. What you're talking about is the operational plan of management. It's the plan of management that's generally, and it focuses on the condition about traffic, parking, how all of that operates. The master plan, which is not necessarily always for schools, isn't always necessarily a stamped master plan. Some schools have it and all future consents are consistent with it. Others just have a plan that sets out
a vision plan.
A vision plan.
Yeah.
Is 33 going to be, if you're seeking approval for maximum of 1,600 and there's no more car parking, then if you start, I guess, adding more buildings that would increase staff or student numbers, that type of thing, then you can't just update your operational plan and management. So usually you'd have a master plan that would say, our intention is that this is going to become a new playground, or this is going to be, a community garden for the students. So it's really about setting the vision for how it will be used within your parameters of the maximum 1,600 and those car spaces.
Yeah, I guess the college hasn't got to the point yet that property became available. The college purchased it because it made sense, given it had a direct link to the main college site, but they haven't got to the point yet to have a vision as to how that property fits into their greater plan, shall we say.
Is there access from that site to the school site? Like, can you walk across, or is it a different level?
You can walk across it.
You can.
Would you consider or have you considered, given that one of the car parks that's proposed is removing play area, grass area, etc., from the school community? Did you consider putting a similar play area on 33 to offset the area that's lost by the proposed car parks?
Greg, I just have to say, is that something you could answer? Thank you.
That. We have looked at it as a passive play space area, but originally it was going to be where a potential car park was going to be, but that sort of, as Alan said, that sort of didn't meet the criteria. I've looked at it as a possible market garden for the students, sort of place to grow herbs and vegetables that they could reuse in the canteen. I've looked at several things like that, but just haven't been able to really land on anything at the moment. But yes, certainly have considered a range of options, and I keep presenting different things that may work.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
if this consent was approved, there can't be any increase in numbers through a CDC. So if there's a development consent in place that limits the numbers, a CDC cannot increase those numbers. So anything that goes there effectively increases the room available for the students, but cannot increase the number of students.
All right. Any further questions from the panel members?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, and I'll arrange to get that information regarding the acoustic assessment through to the panel as soon as I can.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Sorry, on that acoustic assessment, it's on page 5, Chairman.
Oh, thank you.
And
Michael.
it does rely upon those previous acoustic readings, because when the application was done, it was done through COVID, but they're the background noise. So there's a separate assessment of the noise generated by the 1,200 and the 1,600. So the actual noise against the background. So normally backgrounds done previously are conservative because things get busier, not quieter.
Okay, so you're saying that the background noise was assessed, I think, the years that you mentioned.
2013 and 18, yeah. But the student numbers on the terrace and the 1,216, if you have a look at the contour maps that are attached to the acoustic report, are done on the basis of these numbers.
So they took into account the terrace and the 1,600.
Yeah, those buildings exist, and it shows you the contours coming from those spaces.
Excuse me, can I just speak? John here. The building of the terrace did not exist when that report was, when those readings were done.
Yes, I think
the diagram in there, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Storms just explained that they were a measurement of background noise, but that the, which is essentially, it's hard to explain, but but the acoustic report has taken into account the student numbers based on a figure of 1,600 and including them being using the terrace.
However, the terrace didn't exist in that time.
It didn't exist for the measurement of background noise, no.
It didn't exist for the actual noise, and there is an opportunity today to take some readings of the actual noise that the school is emanating, rather than using an extrapolation based on measurements that were done several years ago, and with extensions of the school, other bits of the school being built that aren't taken into account in the acoustic report, because they're just extrapolations based on old measurements.
All right. So there are all the speakers. As I said in my opening, the public component of this meeting will now be closed, and the panel will deliberate on all the items.
Annalise, could we request a half an hour break to go and have some lunch?
Sure. All right. So the meeting is now concluded at 2:58, and the panel will reconvene at 3:30.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.